Welcome to the Evolved Caveman, where men learn to be successful and happy with your host, Dr. John Schinnerer, as he shares the most impactful ideas and practices for you to get the most from your relationships, your work, and from your life. Now here's Dr. John.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. John Schinnerer. Welcome back to the Evolved Caveman podcast. And I'm really psyched today to have with me Mark Winkler. And Mark is the author of the highly anticipated book, My Daughter's Keeper, published by November Media Publishing. My Daughter's Keeper is the life-changing memoir of a father battling through multiple court systems and police investigations to maintain custody of his daughter. Forced to face his past mistakes and learn from the love of his daughter, the author uses his pain to create a blueprint for parents struggling to stay in their children's lives against all odds. Mark is a big proponent of men's groups and mentoring. He is actively involved in Manhood Camp, a youth mentoring program, and Fatherhood Circle, which supports fathers in parenting issues and navigating the courts around custody and related issues. Mark's going to be holding a book signing Saturday, June 29th, 6 p.m. at the Metaphor Club on 4333 Crenshaw Boulevard in LA. And if you're unable to attend the event but would still like to get the book, you can visit Malik Books, M-A-L-I-K, books.com. To sign up for the book signing and the reading, you can go to eventbrite.com and search for My Daughter's Keeper in LA, or you can go to the show notes. I'll have the link in the show notes here. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. How you doing?
I'm good, John. It's a pleasure, man.
So we talked a little bit before this, and you told me sort of your origin story. I always like the idea of kind of a superhero origin story, because I think we all have that heroic part of us.
We all have some hero in us.
This story definitely has some heroic aspects to it. So would you share your origin story with the listeners?
Sure, man, sure. So look, I like to say that I'm from New York, right? But my wife always reminds me that I was born in St. Louis. So I'm New York by way of St. Louis, but I cut my teeth really in New York, and grew up there and with my father, but going back and forth from St. Louis to New York to visit my mom often, okay. and so then I recently, well, you know what? It's no longer recently, man. It's been several years since I've been out here to California, so I think I can officially say I am a Californian at this point. I think after 10 years, you can claim California.
Okay, fair enough.
I think that's the time limit, man. I could be mistaken about that. So I moved out here to California with an organization. Well, it was an entertainment group I was working with at the time. Pretty big rapper, and we sort of moved out. Packed everything up and moved out to Beverly. And so that's where I've been, and what I did that for a few years, and it kind of became exhausting to me after a while, man, because there's so much. Look, I love Hollywood. My father's an actor, nothing against it, but for me, it just became a little bit exhausting, a little bit overwhelming. But deeper than that, I believe the calling to work with families and youth began to get louder and louder. I was doing that actually when I was in New York. So that calling began to amplify in my mind. So about 7 years ago, about 6 or 7 years ago, I joined forces with my partner, organizational partner, Trayvon Tillis, and we got Manhood Camp off the ground. And that was specifically working with, as they're called, at-risk youth. Mm-hmm. And then a few years back, maybe about a year and a half ago, 2 years, we implemented the Fatherhood Circle. And for me, that was very important because in working with the youth and the families as we do, but it was a sort of on a marginal basis with Manhood Camp, I said, look, I want to go deeper and really, get to some of the core issues that impact the youth. And one of the things was just, not having a strong male figure, or having sort of a male figure, but that wasn't central. Right. So we brought in the Fatherhood Circle to the Manhood Camp, and that's been great, man. It's been up and down with that because sometimes it's really difficult, as you can imagine, working with fathers and men in general, just to get them to emote and talk about what's going on with them, man. But there's been some really strong progress with that group, man. So we're really excited about that.
Congratulations. That's awesome work.
Thank you, John. So that's my heroic origin story, man.
So tell me, how did you get into the situation with your daughter and the courts? Where does that end? Because it sounds like you were doing this work in your professional life, and then it was also going on parallel in your personal life.
Sure. So when I moved out here to California, I met a young lady, and as things go, we got deeper involved, and we had a child, right? But I think, one of the things that I touch on in my book is that one thing that we did not fully come to an understanding of expectations about life goals and who we were as people and kind of what we wanted. There was just more of the baseline attraction. And as a result of that, as we got deeper into the relationship when the child came, we both realized that, hey, this is not working. This is something that, is not going to be a healthy dynamic for the child, right? Because as people who get together and they don't have matching expectations or goals, tension can grow. And that happened in that relationship.
Don't we all do that once?
Was that?
Don't we all do that once?
We all do that. I think it's a rite of passage. I don't know. So that happened, man. And then, so we slid down the path, man, that got more contentious. And that led to us going to court. And then that just ballooned and amplified and mushroomed into, not only court, but police investigations. And, so that journey is what I capture in my book, John. And one of the things I come out of that experience with is understanding that, you have to have a lot of sort of introspective moments about yourself. And you should actually, before you get into parenting, but definitely before you get into a relationship that could lead to a parenting moment. So having those moments, it really helped to amplify in me, the understanding of what parenthood was. And so I figured that, this experience that I went through, I should, put it down on paper and then, bring it to the world. Yeah. Because, one of the things I say about the book is that, for me, it was, I hope the book, stands as a moment of understanding for men, and not understanding, but hope for men going through the situation, and understanding for women who are involved with men who are going through this, or women who are, on the other side of the court aisle, trying to, in that custody battle situation. So it was, that was sort of the baseline for the book. And for me, as a father, I think it's important to share and to help other fathers. And that was really the basis for jumping back just a tick, for the Fatherhood Circle. I wanted to make certain that, I helped other fathers who were going through the situation, but not only this situation, John, but just going through the experience of fatherhood. Right now, this, of course, going through a custody battle can seriously interrupt that process, as you can imagine.
Well, yeah, I've lived it. That was one of the reasons why, your story resonated with me is I've been in the courts as a white male, which is a little bit different than your experience, but I think there's some similarities there as well. I mean, when I first got involved, when my wife, now my ex-wife, brought us into litigation, which we wouldn't do, there was all these accusations that were flying, domestic violence. I was like, I've never laid a hand on you. Like, what? She's like, I don't know if he has a gun. Like, I've never owned a gun in my life. Like, there was all these things that happened that were misrepresentations of the truth. Right. You have to go back and kind of systematically prove that these aren't true. And it's very, very stressful. Sure.
And I think, and when you say as a white male, one of the things that I hope this book does, it creates a thread of understanding that, we as men, as fathers, we share, a special commonality, a special bond, right? But as a Black male, when I went into the court, there was a lot of the historical, things on my mind, like, would I get a fair go at this? Will I have to, be extra mindful of my intonations and my movements not to appear as threatening.
Yeah, your
so,
emotion.
Am I just expressing
if you
regular
come across
emotion,
as angry, like that's going to create problems for you, I would imagine.
It would, man. So
it's hard not to.
It's very hard not to, man. But I was very mindful of that. I was very mindful of that. One, as a male, but then layered with the fact that of the intersection as a Black male, right? So I knew that, I would go into court, and I didn't know what the makeup of the court would be. I didn't know who the judge would be. I didn't know who would be standing across. I knew my lawyer because I was very meticulous about the lawyer that I picked. Right. And I talk about that in the book. I talk about, you can't just get any lawyer, right? You have to get a lawyer that is passionate about your story, right? And so I was very meticulous about that, but that was the only element that I knew, that I was somewhat certain of, right? Everything else, I was walking in there with assumptions. And I tell you, I didn't want to walk in there. I hesitated for a long time, man, because of the fear in me of going to court as a Black male, right? So I was very hesitant about that, and I avoided it up until the point that the narrative started to grow so much from my child's mother that I was, this person that was not fit to be a father, right? And so I said I had to take a preemptive move on that. So I actually went into court first, and then I filed papers to get, proper custody of my child, a fair and balanced custody of my child.
At that point, what custody did you have? Did you have any? Did you have 20%?
At that point, we had a verbal agreement. Before we went into court.
And so did she start withholding time?
Yes. So time was being withheld. A narrative was being created that I was this, bad person.
It's interesting. Can I stop you there? Because I got that same play, which was my ex-wife started hiding the children from me. So when it was my time, she'd just be like, "Oh, I don't know, they're at a friend's house or they're with my parents." And then that was flipped as he's not an active father. He doesn't.
Sure.
And so the degree of manipulation really smacked me in the face in the middle of this.
It happens. See, that's the thing, man. And when I'm with the fathers that I talk about, I say, look, you do everything that you can do to be a productive and dutiful father in your child's life, right? After, while you're with the mother, and hopefully that relationship will maintain in peace. But if it doesn't, you make certain that you are a dutiful father and you maintain records of that, right?
Yeah,
you maintain
everything.
Right. And so
video, taking notes, like you've got to document.
You have to document, man. And it's laborious and you don't want to do it. And then more than that, you don't feel like you have to do it, right? And you don't feel like you should have to do it because you are a father and you are having just a life experience with your child, and you don't feel like you have to record that for antiquity, or more specifically record it because you're about to go to court. But at that point, I say that, you have to sort of diminish the ego, right? And realize that what you feel you shouldn't have to do at this point, you need to do, because you're going to be going into a situation where, in fact, you're going to be called upon to prove you're the father who you say you are. And so I did that. And I was, I learned from the experiences of family members who were, a couple of family members who had gone through very bitter custody situations, and me, when I was younger, sitting up in court watching them just being shredded. And I knew that wasn't the father that I knew in front of me. Now, I wasn't speaking to the man that they were in the relationship, right? Because, that's sometimes two very different things, right? I admit I was not the model person to be in a relationship. I wasn't abusive or anything like that, but, I could have been more attentive. I could have been more present. I could have been more honest. At a certain point when I realized that the relationship was not productive and it wasn't going in I could have been more honest, right? So I'm very accountable, and now and in the book that I write. But I say that, you put that to the side as a father. If you're a good father, then you have to be able to show that. And so I decided at a certain point that I needed to demonstrate that. So I went in, and this is another thing I suggest to fathers who are going through this situation. that, you present your claim first. Don't be on the other side of trying to defend yourself, right? Because then you're playing catch up. But if you present to the court, say, hey, look, this is who I am as a father. This is who I want to continue to be as a father. And this is the proof that I have that my words are valid. Then when those other words come in from the respondent at that point, then it looks as if, there's some question now of, okay, now I need to listen to this. I need to listen more closely because this father actually took, proactive steps to be in the child's life.
Yeah. And if I can jump in there, one of the things that I found is when I first started litigation, there was a lot of misrepresentations, as I said, on her part. And I was shocked, stunned, hurt, angry. Yeah. And, I got really disillusioned with the court system in general because I was forced to pay child support on false motives for about a year. And it nearly broke me. Right. And, I stuck with the process, stayed with it, kept documenting, kept being honest, kept living in my integrity. Sure. And granted, it took a long time. It was 3.5 years, but by the end, the court system actually did work, and I did receive what I think is some degree of justice and vindication. So, be aware also for the men out there that are in this situation, it's a long game. It's a marathon. And so you don't want to get blindsided. You don't want to get cut down by those intense negative emotions, which you are necessarily going to feel at the beginning and throughout the process. Right. You got to do the best you can to stay calm, document, prove that you're a good dad, and trust that the process will, at some level, take care of you.
I love when you say live in your integrity, right? Because that has to be a very conscious act. Right?
It's hard.
It's hard, especially on the second point that you made, that it's a marathon, or it can be a marathon, right? And it's relative sometimes. It's for some, the marathon is six to a year, which is my marathon, and some it's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Yeah. And so it becomes very difficult. And one of the things I did, John, to maintain my integrity is that when you speak also about anger, right, that comes up naturally in your mind, especially when you feel that you're being treated unjustly, and not just feel you are being treated unjustly. I had to make a conscious decision to not allow certain information or feelings in my mental real estate, right? First, I had to regulate that for myself, right? So I had to, and the way I did that is I had to be accountable about what led me to this situation. It wasn't just that, I couldn't say it was just a mean mother trying to, get me. I couldn't say that, right? I had to say that there was a dynamic there that we both contributed to the toxicity of.
That's a huge point. Thank you for bringing that up. Kind of the idea of everything's a co-creation, that I've got my piece, she has her piece.
Absolutely.
So taking responsibility.
And I had to take ownership of my piece, right? And so all of this helped to start to regulate the levels of anger growing in my mind, right? And then the next step that I had to do was, look, you have family and friends around you, right? And they're naturally going to be your allies, and they're naturally going to be angry and upset for you, right? And so I had to have conversations with them. I said, hey, look, I get you're angry for me. I get you upset, and I love you for that. But what I need from you is, if you're going to pray for me, and then in those quiet prayers, if you want to be angry, do that. But if you project that onto me, it's going to be more difficult for me not to fall into that atmosphere.
Yeah, that was incredibly insightful of you. I mean, I look back at my experience, and I know there were people around me that were more angry and more hurt than I was.
Yes.
Emotions are contagious, so it's hard not to pick up that emotion.
Absolutely.
And so you have to find some way to keep boundaries so that you minimize your contact with that sort of those emotions.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And as a result of that, you're going to have family and friends who, they won't necessarily fall by the wayside, but they're going to be angry. Their anger is going to switch to you. You're going to be like, why aren't you more angry? Why aren't you fighting this way? Right. But I knew, and this is going back to the court, I knew that now we go back, if I come into court with those emotions and those feelings, everything that was in her written narrative would be that's who he is,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that mindfulness of being a Black male, again, going back to that point, that I had to be mindful that if I came in there projecting that way, and here's the thing, John, it's projecting my feelings and my emotions for my child.
Yep.
Right. So it's natural to feel that way. Right. That what some would consider machismo or bravado or exaggerated bravado or toxic masculinity or whatever they want to call it. Right. That's what I would have been seen as. So I had to regulate that.
Well, and I think that, and forgive me, I don't mean to put my foot in my mouth because I'm not a Black man, but.
Mm-hmm. You're not?
No, I'm not sure.
I put my glasses on here, man.
I like to think I am, but it's a fantasy. Anyway, but I think that one of the risks that you run, and to a lesser extent I run, is when we go into court, if we show any of that, if they get a whiff of anger, then the narrative that she's pitching, he's an angry man.
Sure.
Then all they need is a whiff of it to confirm, for a judge to confirm that and go, oh, yep, there it is. And then you're done.
Sure. And then everything
important to manage that emotion.
Sure. That's what I said. That's what I was saying. Like, I had to be extra mindful of that, right? Because I was coming into court not just with her narrative. I was coming into court with historical narrative. I was coming to court with how the news portrays me, right? How television shows and movies historically. I mean, things are getting a little better, but I had all of that swirling around me, and that's not fantasy, that's a reality, right? Yeah. And so I walk with that reality, and, but I walk with strength, of course, because I know that's not who I am, right? And so when I walked into court, I said, that's not who I am, so that's not who I am going to portray to be. What I am is a father that loves his daughter and has every right to be in my child's life. Right?
Yeah, no, go back. When we were talking earlier, you mentioned another, I guess I would call it a tool or an approach, where you kind of took the love from your daughter and used that in court as well. Right.
And so look, that's exactly what I did. I made a decision that I was going to struggle in love. Right? I was not going to struggle in hate. I was not going to struggle in anger. Right, because those that leads you down a particular path. If I struggle in love, that's going to lead me to a particular path. Now, look, it's not necessarily going to be a quick path, right? Because you spoke about marathons, right?
So it's not without bumps.
It's exactly. There are bumps in the road, man. And so I had to be like I was driving a rental car. I had to be very calm because I didn't want to bring back a damaged vehicle. So I had to be very mindful of that. But it was the love that I had for my daughter and the experiences that we had up until that point. And so I kept an image of her in my mind that, I wanted to be reunited with this person, with my daughter. And if I went a certain way, that wouldn't happen. And so I had to project myself. And I'll give you an example. When the Child Protective Services investigation started, right? I had someone who, a lady called me, I'm coming to your home to visit, right? And so I said, okay, I know she's going to come with a profile, probably, thick as, a ream of paper. And a lot of that's probably going to be negative, right? Because a lot of that's going to contain the narrative.
Yeah, from your ex.
From my ex, right? And so I said, I have to put in front of her a different narrative before we even start the conversation. So I told my friend, who now is my wife, right, that what I was going to do, and I talk about this in the book, I was going to read a passage from Khalil Gibran, right?
Great poet, yeah.
Great poet. And he talks about parent. He talks about being a parent. And the passage goes, it's real, not going to say the whole thing, but the gist of it is that, you are basically an archer and you're flinging an arrow in a certain direction. So you have to be very careful. And it talks really about the responsibility and love and accountability of a parent, right? And so I read that to her before we even started. She said, okay, how you doing, Mr. Winkler? I said, I'm great. I said, hey, look, before we get started, I'd like to read you something. And so I took out the book, I started to read, and I swear I noticed the wheels started to shift because I could see in her eyes, right? Because being in the entertainment industry, working with families, I study people, right? Yep. And so I'm seeing this shift. And then when I finished, John, she said, wow, that's amazing. She said, I love him. I even had him read at my marriage, at my a marriage ceremony. And then I said in my mind, okay, now we can begin.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, so you were very strategic and thoughtful and, as you say, mindful about how you went through the process. So let me ask you another question. My experience going through this process in litigation and child custody was that it was some of the most intense negative emotions that I've ever felt in my life because, for instance, one of the universal triggers for anger is family. So if someone is threatening your family, you have a rage response and you want to attack back to protect your family.
Sure.
I mean, at a very basic level. But they don't say what happens if it's your own family attacking your family.
Right.
Because it's, you know, your ex kind of attacking you. And then also sort of attacking your relationship with your children. So would you agree with that? Or to what extent would you agree with that those are some of the most intense negative emotions that you've ever experienced? And part of the reason I ask is that I want to prepare men that are going through this process.
Right.
This is going to be a challenge, and you've got to do everything that you can to learn emotional management, to learn self-care, self-soothing, to stay calm in these really triggering situations.
I 100% agree with you. And to try to fully explain how you're going to feel in those moments, I think it's you just can't do it, right? If you're talking to someone who's at the starting gate of this, and you're trying to explain to them, well, this is what you're going to experience, right? Even in my book, I'm realistic to know that someone who's perhaps about to go through this, if they get their hands on that book, it's not going to be this great revelation and they're going to be like, oh, I know now how to manage this, right? That's not going to happen, right? Because as you said, it is so intense. And then when it's an internal battle, right? When it's family against family, it's even more intense because you'll still have emotions for the other person.
Right.
So you're still grappling with the fact that you were in this battle with someone who at one point you both spoke of each other in very loving terms, right? So you're still trying to get back to that understanding.
Yeah, and then there's that huge betrayal of how can this person that I love attack me on these levels?
Right.
So there's all sorts of triggers wrapped up in this. I mean, in mine, I remember early on, my wife at the time, served papers on me to start litigation. She also served papers on my parents in an attempt to get at some of their money. And I was like, how could you've known them for 25 years. They've been nothing but kind to you. Right. Who does that?
Sure.
So yeah, interesting.
Let me make one point to that. But see, that's why I think it's really important, John, that when you're in that emotional state, you have to keep in mind that this is a duality. Right? This is not something that is only emanating from her side. There's a certain feelings that she had that you as a man contributed to, not necessarily you as the father, but you as a man, right? And I think that for me, that helped to start to balance out and lower those levels of anger, right? Because I wasn't projecting everything on her at that point.
Yeah, and I think the other tool that you can use in those situations is have a friend that you can send texts to that like you're writing to her. Sure. But you send them to the friend just to get it out of your system. Because one of the problems in this day and age is that communication is so instantaneous. And so we get hit by extreme anger and you want to lash out or you want to respond. And that'll get you in all sorts of trouble in these situations because then it's documentation, it's proof. Look how angry he is. See this text he just sent me? He's threatening me.
Absolutely.
And so to have a friend that you can send those kind of texts to blow off steam is a really powerful way to go.
That's actually a very good strategy. I will be using it. I give you credit for it when I use it. So I won't be using that one.
Let me turn to a little bit different gear. So what have you learned in terms of, let me put a little context on this. So I think, I look back at my relationship, my marriage, and we met at 17. So I was young, I didn't know much. So I can kind of let myself off the hook a little bit there, I didn't know enough.
Sure.
But looking back at it now, I've tried to look at, that was a selection error. Essentially, I think I picked the wrong person. As you said, I wasn't clear enough on my intention. We didn't have any agreement. We didn't have much in terms of common goals, common interests. So I looked a lot at what am I looking for now in an ideal relationship? Do you have any thoughts on that? Like what you would look for, how you would go about that?
Well, yeah, it would be my wife, of course, right now.
Good answer.
But it would be someone that you are, you're both very clear about what you want. Now, you may not be clear about, the pathway to get there, right? But you have some ideas, right? There has to be a similar motivation on both parts in pursuit of each other's goal. And I think that there should also be some merging of mutual goals. And that normally comes in family, but I think it's healthy to even on a professional level to have certain things that you are both motivated by that you can both work on. Mm-hmm. And I think that you have to be both very supportive of one another, right? You can't be jealous, envious of a person of whatever level of success they're attaining, right? You have to be supportive and realize that in the scheme of things, that either person's success will bring success to the whole. Yes. So it's about being very mindful about who you are as a person, right? You have to be very confident in yourself about who you are and what you want. So, and not rely on the other person to make you feel special or to make you feel motivated about yourself. Yeah, now they can help, of course.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I think your point of support is a really, really good one. I mean, one of the pieces of advice I offer to young couples is, or young people is find someone that is willing to grow with you.
Absolutely.
If you're a female and you find a male that's willing to grow with you, that's half the battle. Because if I'm willing to learn in a relationship, there's a lot of stuff that we can overcome.
Right.
One of the problems becomes when one of the partners isn't willing or can't learn and adopt new skills.
Right. Right.
Because then it's a deal killer.
It stagnates, man. And I think my wife's a therapist, right? And she often talks about you have to re-examine the contracts and agreements that you made in the beginning of the relationship, right? Because you made certain agreements at the point that you were at that point. You said you were 17 when you met, right? So you guys made a contract and an agreement at that point, mental contract, mental agreements. But as you grew older, clearly things changed in you, interests changed, motivations. So there needed to be a re-examination of, hey, look, are we still on the same page? Is this relationship contract still valid for us? Right. And some people just power through that. They don't stop and then reassess where they are. Right. And then as a result of not doing that, they find themselves in very contentious situations because they're no longer happy just with going to the movies together. Right? They're no longer happy just taking a walk in the park or whatever was agreed upon at that point. So I think it has to be a constant reevaluation about, hey, look, are we still on the same page here?
Yeah, and I think in terms of going back to that selection question, to me, what I suggest to couples is, or single people, is come up with a list of top 5 items that these are must-haves, and then maybe a list of 3 things that are deal killers.
Right.
So, for instance, when I was looking for a partner after my divorce, I was looking for someone with emotional intelligence and awareness. Integrity was a huge one for me.
Sure.
Emotional balance, communication skills.
Right.
And then, I mean, to me, the physical attraction is the easiest piece.
Absolutely.
Like someone that I think is beautiful and is in good shape, like that's pretty easy to find. Someone that has those things, that is emotionally aware, can communicate, is supportive, positive.
Sure.
On top of that, that's a taller order.
Right. And that's the substance, though. That's the substance that lasts. The other changes, right? And so what is considered beautiful to you at that point with her, later on, if your views of beauty remain the same, she may not be that person.
Right.
That 10 years later,
And it's funny also so your wife is a therapist, yeah?
Yes.
So the woman I've been dating for 3.5 years is also a therapist.
Okay.
And a lot of the people, it's fascinating. A lot of people that I've talked to in men's work or men's coaching, their wives are also therapists. It's really interesting. And I think, I've thought about it, and I think it gives us more communication skills. It gives us more languaging around how to speak to some of these issues. It also gives us the freedom and permission to feel whatever it is we're feeling without judgment, which, I don't think most men ever get.
No, I think it's difficult because I think as we've been sort of socialized as men, women have been socialized in their understanding of men, right? So they don't necessarily expect they want their man to care, but they don't necessarily expect it. And at times they're a little off-put when they do see a man emoting in a certain way, because women are very big on security. So if they see a man in a situation where he is seemingly not portraying or projecting that, then that brings about a certain fear for the women, like, well, am I secure now? Because this guy is going through something that makes me feel like we're not in a secure place. Right. But a therapist understands that there's a waves of emotions that you go through, right? And you just have to be able to properly navigate those waves. And the therapist can help you do that, right? Sometimes it's irritating as hell that they can't help you. Right?
Yeah.
You don't want to talk about it, John.
I'm tired of talking about it. Just stop.
Time out, man. Let's not talk, damn it.
But yeah, I've got an interview coming up with Paul Kibble, who wrote the book Men's Work, who was doing work in Oakland 30 years ago. And he was working with, I think, mostly domestic violence men. And he came up with the idea of the act like a man box culture, which became a man box culture, which is that whole idea of, we're socialized in a certain way. We're socialized to be invulnerable, to not feel, to dominate women, to be not back down, to not show weakness, all those things. And then when we step outside of that box, we'll inevitably get smacked into the box, usually by an insult. Stop being a pussy. Don't be a fag. Don't be gay. Man up. All the stuff that we got growing up.
Absolutely.
It still seems to be out there. I mean, some people will say, well, isn't that improving? Yeah, I think it's improving a little bit. But I mean, I've talked to high school students recently who said, yeah, my girlfriend just told me to stop being a pussy because I was crying in front of her. So to your point, I think that women are socialized in the same sort of paradigm. And one of the reasons I started this podcast was to get that idea out there so that we can kind of turn down the volume, or at least become aware of that man box culture.
Look, there was a great Greek story that I like, the cave, the allegory of the cave, that talks about
Plato.
Plato's right. And so they talk about men being, people being chained together, and then one breaks out free and realizes, hey, this is a different world, right? So you have men breaking out of this cave now, out of this box, and they see that out of that box, they're still men. Out of that cave, they're still men, but they get to experience the fullness of their life, the fullness of what being able to express emotions can bring. But when they come back down and they start talking, it's like, man up. What are you talking about? When you go out there and you grew up a giant when you got out the cave?
But yeah, so it's interesting because in that allegory, the other part of it is, so they're chained and there's fire on one side of them, and the fire casts shadows on the wall of the cave, and they see the shadows and they think that's all of reality.
Right.
So all the reality is pretty much black and white. So then when they do get out of the cave, they see reality in full color and they're stunned. They've never seen it.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's a great metaphor to use for allowing men full emotional freedom and increasing emotional awareness. Because honestly, I mean, in my quest, and it's been a long path to kind of create more emotional awareness and intelligence, but I've never been happier or more fulfilled now that I'm able to feel and express every emotion that I have. And I think I used to look at them as masculine and feminine. Now I look at them as just fucking human.
There's human experiences, John. Look, we go through the same experiences, right? But because we're socialized, we, as you said, man, we bottle these things up, we box them in, and we're not able to fully enjoy or fully just, be in the present in the moment of being sad. And we, our death rates are higher because of that, right? Because we're internalizing all of that, which is dis-ease for the body, which turns to disease after. And so we're trapped in this paradigm, man. So that's why, what's the gentleman's name you said who created that?
It's Paul Kibble, K-I-B-B-L. Yeah, if you haven't already, check out the book. It's Men's Work.
I will. Devon Franklin, in his book, The Truth About Man, he talks about that as well. And I just love that idea, man, of being able to look at it. I had a chance to talk to Devon. I said, hey, look, when I think men are afraid because when they break out of that box, when they're on the other side of that cave, right? What then? right? How are they to define themselves, especially because it's not an ocean of men out there?
Well, not only define themselves, part of it is, and I've talked to businessmen about this, that, I'm trying to get them to be more emotionally expressive and emotionally aware at home initially.
Right.
And many of them have come back and said, John, that scares the shit out of me, because if I let the emotions out at home, what guarantee do I have that I can keep them contained at work? And we don't like to be humiliated. We don't like to be embarrassed. So the last thing we want is to start crying at work. And so there's a fear there of, once I let these emotions out, can I put them back in? And so one of the ideas that I put out there is this idea of backdraft, which is a metaphor from firemen, where when firemen come into a burning house, they don't just immediately go to the second floor and start opening bedroom doors looking for survivors. Because of that backdraft effect, where the fire sucks up all the oxygen in the room. So when you open the door, the fire explodes outward and can kill you.
Sure.
So what they do instead is they go onto the roof, they tap small holes into the roof to allow oxygen in slowly. Now they can go in, look in the rooms and see if there's survivors without risk to themselves. And so the idea emotionally is that, look, you can go into some of these dark areas in yourself, some of these scary places in your mind or your heart. If it gets overwhelming, just slowly back out, close the door. So you can compartmentalize and check out these things slowly and safely in areas or at times when you want to.
Sure. And I think, I think that's brilliant, man. I think, being able to, to slowly walk into this understanding. One of the things that helped me to do that was when I was going through this and I was trying to keep, a certain mental mindset, I still had to express. I still had to, you spoke about writing text and sending it. Which is brilliant. Again, I needed to find a space where I could emote, right? And so I found different fatherhood groups, right? And there was a couple of particular groups out here that I went to that I think later on that sort of recalled in my mind, and that was another inspiration for me starting the Fatherhood Circle. But in those spaces were fathers who, because of the nature of that space, we had permission to do that. Right. And I know, looking at some of those fathers and talking to some of those fathers, I knew that this was not something that they did necessarily outside of this space, but that was an opportunity for them to do it. But it taught them that if you do it in the right company, that it's okay, because you don't necessarily, like the guys that you work with, they, in some spaces, I just won't be understood. And you still want to be yourself, but you don't want to present that in certain spaces.
Well, and I think that your idea and suggestion of men's group is so huge. I mean, I've done some work with Jed Diamond, who's written about 16 books on men and irritable male syndrome and male menopause. The one he's got coming out is 12 Rules for Good Men. And his first rule is you should attend a men's group. And there's something really powerful to being in a group of men that has some ground rules of, non-judgment, no competitiveness, no one-upmanship, no put-downs.
Right.
Just be in the experience of other powerful men, or to be in the environment with other men.
Right.
Because it's unlike anything we've usually experienced, because one of the ways that we're socialized is we get along with other men through put-downs, through sarcasm, through one-upmanship. And we're always establishing who's more alpha than the other. Right. And it's an exhausting process.
It is.
So to be with men where you're not doing that is game changing.
It is. And at first, it's definitely going to be, you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. At first, it's definitely you have reservations about it because you are, it's a scary thing because you're walking into new territory, right? But in those spaces like AA, like, NA, you find that there's the commonality of pain, the commonality of experience that leads you to know that it's okay for me to bring my situation to the table, right? And the more you do it, the more comfortable you become with it. And then when you step outside that space, you begin like a training wheel, right? Yeah. Like you ride a bike, you first have the training wheels, and you realize that I can now take these training wheels off, and I don't have to be afraid about who someone's going to see me as.
Well, I think you bring up a couple really good points there. One is that all this growth, all this stepping into new territory, all the stepping out of the comfort zone is scary as hell. So for people that are looking at doing that, for men that are looking at doing that, just know that's normal. Like, it's going to be scary. It's going to be uncomfortable.
Right.
That's okay. Do it anyway.
Sure.
And I forget the other point.
Well, we're sports driven, so it's Nike. So just do it.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that men's groups are one of the keys to helping us get past this.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a good training wheel, man. And then, you can start doing it amongst your friends. Like, you go, there's established men's group, but we all have our men's circles, right? We all have guys that we hang out with. And so you then have to be able to bring that sort of dialogue in that atmosphere and those circles as well. You have to get permission for guys to talk about that. Now, people who have gone through this experience, fathers who have gone through this experience, and they're talking with other fathers, they'll do that, right? Mm-hmm. But if you are a father who is with other fathers of the men who have not gone through really emotional sort of experiences, especially when it comes to the situation where your child has been taken out of your life, mm-hmm. you still have a tendency to talk about sports, talk about politics, but if you have the understanding now, because you got out of that cave, that it's a better life on the other side, then when you're with your guys, you form your own men's circle, man.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know the other thing I was going to say is you kind of alluded to the fact that we get into a men's group and we start sharing these, our pain and suffering, the darker mm-hmm. emotions mm-hmm. and what we've gone through. And I think it's scary as hell to do that. But once you start doing it, you realize that we've all gone through similar experiences, or if not, we've at least experienced similar emotions.
Right.
There's a beauty in that, in the sense that if we can flip those experiences of like intense anger or intense sadness or intense fear and realize that those don't isolate us, those don't make us, mm-hmm. they're not there to make us feel alone.
Sure.
So we can flip that to, wow, there's millions of people in this world that have also experienced anger or sure. anger over this situation, or sadness, or this confusion. Then those negative emotions can serve to bind us and connect us and create this kind of shared humanity. And it's a really powerful concept.
It is, honestly, and proof in the pudding is this: we've only met face to face now, right? Mm-hmm. But there's a bonding that's happening, and that's a bonding based upon a shared experience, mm-hmm. right? And so we have to, as you said, man, it's real important to realize that we all have those experiences, right? It may not be your particular experience may not be that you're losing a child for a time mm-hmm. period. It may be losing, being cheated on in a relationship. Mm-hmm. It may be losing a parent. It may be whatever it is.
Well, and our experience isn't exactly identical, but the emotion, I would argue, are.
Sure.
And, it's interesting. I remember I did a positive psychology class for therapists and psychologists mm-hmm. a few years ago. And one of the exercises is this, like positive introductions. And so normally when you get in a small class, you do introductions, and we do like, hi, my name is John. I'm a PhD from Cal, and I wrote a book. And no one gives a shit, right? That doesn't connect me to anyone.
Sure.
In fact, it might distance me more from people.
Right.
What we did is this positive introduction, which is tell a story of you at your very best. Mm-hmm. And the fascinating thing is everyone's really kind of nervous about this because I don't brag, like bragging's bad. But the story arc, there's a story arc to it, and it starts mm-hmm. at your low point, some point of struggle, and then the story arc goes like this. And you get past it, you overcome that struggle, and you at your very best is you up here overcoming that struggle. Right. And that, it was a palpable difference in the room that everyone felt more connected to everyone. And so to your point, even like I feel connected to you, but that connection is because of these shared difficulties.
Right.
It's not because we shared our successes.
Right. But I think that there's shared success in these stories, right? Because we both were going through a certain experience, and we were at a low point, as you said. But then now, as we look face to face, I can see a smile on your face, right? And you can see a smile on my face. So there's success there because we both overcame the moment. So,
but I think if you just came in and said, I work with men, I do men's groups, like,
sure,
I was successful in my custody battle with my daughter.
Right.
It's not
probably been a much shorter interview, John.
Yeah. And I got to go.
Right.
But yeah, so Absolutely. And so the reason I point that out is I want to give men permission to share that darker side, or maybe the embarrassing side, or their mistakes or shortcomings, because I do think there's a tremendous amount of power there. And that's where that word vulnerability comes in, which I think most men don't like, probably because they're scared of it. But I think that if you can flip it to even just being more open about how you feel and maybe where you've fallen short, it's a good way to go.
Wait, look, I'm going to use a movie comparison here. You saw the movie Inception with Leonardo, right?
Yeah.
And so they were at certain levels of a dream, but they kept going deeper and deeper and deeper. I think when men do this, when they begin to open up, they go deeper and deeper and deeper within themselves, and they find things there that they didn't even know existed, man. They find new levels of strength there that they didn't even know existed, which really, ironically, really then starts to define them as men.
Yeah, I would say
really
strength and happiness
is at that point.
So your point is well taken. So listen, I got to wrap up here. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have?
If you didn't, man, then what you asked was great. So.
All right. Well, I greatly enjoyed this interview. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing what you have with me. Again, the book is My Daughter's Keeper. And what's the website for Manhood Camp? Is it manhoodcamp.com?
It's manhoodcamp.org.
.org, manhoodcamp.org. The links, if you're interested in Mark's book signing and reading, will be available in the show notes. And again, that is Saturday, June 29th, 6 p.m. at the Metaphor Club on Crenshaw in Los Angeles.
And the book will be released the 28th
of June. All right, so that's going to be the release party.
Right, that would be the release event, the release party, exactly.
Awesome. Well, I wish I could be there for that. That would be fantastic.
Man, look, hey, good. I'm just glad I had the opportunity to talk about it and really just to share a couple of moments with you, John. It's been cool.
Yeah, thanks again. I really appreciate it. It's been a blast.
Absolutely, my friend.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Evolved Caveman podcast. If you like what you've heard, support us by subscribing, leaving reviews, and sharing the podcast with friends and colleagues. For the latest, most powerful tools to connect with like-minded men, join the Facebook group at The Evolved Caveman. Follow Dr. John on Instagram at The Evolved Caveman, all one word, or join the email list by visiting guidetoself.com.